Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the February 22nd Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Nunavut First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Karen Robertson. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter, Council Procedure Bylaw 2018 number 7272, and Ministerial Order number M192, governing open meetings during a state of emergency, and the Provincial Health Officer Order regarding gatherings and events. Therefore, members of the public are required to observe meetings virtually and not attend in person, and question period will be suspended throughout the duration of the provincial health orders in effect. The first item on the agenda is to introduce late items.
There are no late items.
There are no late items. Okay, thank you. So could I get a motion for the adoption of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Hemmons, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. In favor? Agenda adopted. Now a motion for adoption of the minutes as circulated. Moved Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Hemmons. All in favor? Minutes adopted. Brings us to number 5, reports. And first report on the agenda is agenda planning. Ms. Robertson, you'd be...
I think the CAO is going to introduce the topic today.
Excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just highlighting the one immediate sheet on the upcoming schedule. So just to reiterate, March 8th is scheduled as the Community Amenity Contribution Policy, which is a bit of a project that's been underway for a number of months with the assistance of consultants, and that'll be presented by the Development Services Department. Fairly significant conversation, and there could be. Is it okay now?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyway, that's a significant item for the March 8th meeting. On March 22nd, we're recommending that we split the two sessions that are talked about on that into 2 meetings, and that a special meeting be scheduled on March 29th, just because it's a big topic, and so the council priorities would be rescheduled for the March 29th special GPC. On March 22nd, the building permit review, it's being coordinated by Mr. Alan Nielsen, the consultant. He's going to be coming to council and giving probably a fairly detailed presentation on his findings and recommendations for improvements to the building permit system in the city. So in speaking with the mayor last week, he felt, and I agreed with him, that probably need to have a separate day for that. It's a big topic, and a separate day for maybe a 3-hour session on kind of building off of the strategic planning work that you did a couple of weeks ago. Beyond that, we don't have anything specific identified other than the Reimagine projects, and then of course the list on the next page of your agenda in case there's anything there that you would like to either move up or add to. So it's just part of the day's agenda that this is the second, I think, time now we've brought this to the very beginning of the GPC. So it's an information item unless you have specific questions or direction.
Any comments or questions regarding agenda planning? Councillor Hemmons.
Thanks, Chair. As I was reviewing what's coming and what we want to flesh out more, I was thinking about the Reimagine process and how the GPC was created as a way for council to have discussion on those meatier issues that council meetings don't typically have time for, and also to involve members of the public. And I wonder if, given that we're having a hard time fleshing out some of these topics that we've identified as wanting more information on, I wonder if there would be value in having the public identify the top 3 GPC items that they'd like to see. Because these really are, they're information for us, but they're also they're kind of what is the conversation in the community right now. So it's just a thought I had. It might be interesting to use Bang the Table in that way, to ask folks if they want to see council have a robust discussion with a lot of staff resources and et cetera applied. Maybe they can help us choose which one would be good. Just a thought.
Not seeing any other questions. I just had one item. I think that, you know, the upcoming GPC topics with community amenities, the building development permit review, and then the strategic plan review are sort of critical, important ones that are coming up. And one item, I'm just curious whereabouts it's sitting in the queue and where we're at is sort of the neighborhood associations. And the reason why I'm asking about that is that, you know, we're almost a third through the reimagine process, and it'd be good to figure out sort of where they sit in. And I know that there's questions from the development community, just exactly what the role is of the neighborhood association, sort of how are we interacting with them, sort of what is the protocol around getting feedback from them.
Mr. Chair, through you, let's just Mr. Lindsay provide an answer on that, because it's his department's leading that initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, staff is. Mr. Scholberg, I think, who did the original presentation to GPC, has been continuing his work with the neighborhood network. They're hoping to come back to council in the near future. We had talked about being in front of you as early as April to have that kind of part 2 discussion that we had started last year.
Great, thank you. Director Hammonds, or Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you. Another thought is we have the affordable housing strategy coming up for not GPC, but an update to council. We have the short-term rental policy coming. Community amenity contributions is in there as well. And, you know, we've had the health and housing action plan that we're going to be discussing today. And I wonder, given that housing is such a broad topic in the community, could we have a GPC that looks at how all of those plans work together? That would be useful for me, and I think also useful for the public.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing the timing could be good. We are, of course, ready to come forward soon with our annual update on the affordable housing strategy. So I think if it's something that was transitioned to a GPC meeting, could work very well.
I think those topics are quite timely. I think to get it onto the agenda, kind of need a motion to that effect, and so. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Or my dude. So I'm trying to, I see all these lists of all these items in front of us, and I just, is it, we just say this, we'd like to bump this one up the list? Do we have, I'm wondering, because is some of these work has already taken place or is taking place on some of these things, so some may be able to be moved up faster than others. I'm just not seeing it on here. As an example, the community structure and community engagement. I'm not even sure what that's about. But if there's work being done on that, can we move those up? I just don't, I don't see a way of prioritizing this other than I'd like this one.
Through the chair, what we'd like to do is build this out past more than a month out, obviously, and get a sense of that. And so that's one of the things we could do. Some of these are fairly small, like election signage would be pretty small topic as an example, and some of them are larger. So maybe at our next meeting, we can try to build that out a little better and try to get a quarter or something like that. So it's always important to have a game plan so you don't load up one meeting with too many big things. So what's usually happening is it's evolving through the work plan, and they get to a stage where they can come to council and that type of thing, and I get informed on that, and we go over this virtually every week at SLT, what's coming, and there's a lot of thought into trying to choreograph it so it's balanced and you're not getting loaded up in one meeting. So certainly maybe for the next meeting we can come back with a little bit more granularity around the timing past March of some of these topics when we would put it in. We're just trying to smooth it out so you don't have more than one large topic a day, and you could have certainly smaller topics, and so we will go through this list and we'll do our best to present to you a suggested timetable for all of them, if that's okay.
And if I may ask again, could we also, we're going back to our original format layout of the, where we have the background format and then outcomes, having what I think staff would think possible outcomes could be of this particular meeting, I think would help set our priorities. I'm done, sir.
Councillor Armstrong.
Sorry for being late. I had a late phone call. I would like to know where we're sitting at with the crosswalks, because for me, that's really important. We continue to have close calls, accidents. There's been 2 deaths since, we've been in council, and 1 serious injury. So that's something I think is really important that we look at sooner than later. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, there is a report coming on that. I don't have the exact date, but Mr. Sims is in the audience. He probably can tell you more specifically, but we are coming to council with a report on the recommendations around that in the near future.
Thank you.
Councillor Hammonds.
Thanks, Chair. I think the intention of the last conversation at the GPC was that we were going to come with those. We were each going to choose a few, and we were going to try to flesh that out in more detail. And so it seems like we maybe haven't gotten there today, but I just want to have Ms. Gurry's back, that's what we agreed to do. And again, this is a council committee and a lot of work for staff, and so we want to make sure that when we, I think, put a proposal forward, we're not asking staff to think of the outcomes. We want to give them the outcomes. And that's going to make this process work a lot better, I think, for us, for everyone. So I wonder if that could happen at the next GPC, where we each choose a few topics and we flesh them out and we have that conversation.
Mr. Rudolph, did you have a response to that?
I think that's perfect if we could just focus. So, I mean, to be honest, staff are busy with all the issues in the organization. You've seen them through all the business plan presentations. So all those things are going on, and we need to report back to you on a somewhat of a regular basis as those produce opportunities. And in addition to that, these are some of the things that are coming up. So some of them align with the work plan anyway, and some of them are slightly outside that. Most of the ones that are slightly outside that are pretty small, and the big ticket items aren't. Yeah, what we need to do is build it out a little better and take advantage of this time, because I think what you're suggesting was the idea is that chart where you can fill it out and be prepared to throw a couple ideas on the table and use this as a round table as well. I mean, unfortunately, the format of the room doesn't lend itself to much of that committee feel, but that was the intent. So, certainly make sure that council feels like it's contributing to the agenda, not just staff feeding you the information as it comes through the system.
Excellent. Got Zoom is next in queue, so that might be Councillor Brown. I have Zoom as a individual on this queue list. Councillor Brown.
Sorry to interrupt you, Chair. I just had a text that you can't hear very well.
Are you saying my name?
You're coming in.
Okay, I'm just going to speak. I can barely hear anything. And if it doesn't resolve, I'm probably just going to sign off here. But I did hear a little bit of the earlier conversation and some of Councillor Hammond's remarks. And I just want to say I fully agree. I thought the takeaway was we were supposed to go do our homework and come back with our sort of top list of priorities, and then we would decide as a group. So if we're not doing that today, I would just like some clarity on what we are supposed to come back with. And I did hear Councillor Hemmons also, her mic seems to be coming in through very loud and very clear, that this is our committee, so I think we should be doing the work to come up with the list and then go from there, not expecting staff to flush it out to our little check-in. That's what I heard loud and clear. So so I do think we need to do the work, and we need to really, if staff can help us in this, I think we need to have a clearly defined process and how we're going to select them, so we're not, again, punting it to another meeting. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, a suggestion for our next GPC, which is, I'm not sure the date, I should be able to tell you right off the top of my head. It's, I think it's the 8th of March. Well, it's on the sheet. We will endeavor to have this list fleshed out with dates. We will also remind council that you could furnish, if you have, you're not obligated to, but if you want to furnish GPC with some suggested topics, that could be the opportunity to review that, and we will continue to work through this every time. It's just an open opportunity to have a conversation about these things. So those two things. One is to endeavor to have some schedule to these items, and to also remind council that they could come in with up to 2 or 3 items to put it on the list or have a conversation around it. I don't think we are intending to turn this into like an hour conversation every GPC. It was like bring it, have a quick, and set up a time where you could have a conversation, maybe an hour or whatever it would take for those items. Otherwise, this might end up being a big topic area just doing this. So I think we're just kind of going through a new phase of change here. Moving it from the end to the beginning. Council had always thought that they would use this time not only for more discussion amongst itself, but as Mr. Kopp said, maybe for more deliberate public involvement coming in. So right now, all I can tell you is we do have a schedule for the next 6 weeks, which are fairly significant topics. And on top of that, we haven't even talked about the Reimagine, which you'll get into today, and anything that comes out of the task forces or all of that type of thing. So it's a fair amount going on.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Possibly I misunderstood because I didn't come with my homework done today, if that was the intent. Partly because I thought we went through this process at the last meeting where councillors had a chance to identify what topics they thought were of importance to them. I recall Councillor Turley mentioning the street entertainers bylaw review because the summer season's approaching. I recall mentioning myself One Port Drive and Waterfront Walkway, but with the proviso that presumably when staff had something significant to report that they would be bringing that forward as a suggestion. Neighborhood associations I recall being mentioned by myself and at least one other councillor. So that's on my list, and I agree with Councillor Armstrong about crosswalk safety when staff are ready to give us information on that. And the other one that I thought was important was the community amenity contribution. So that's my list. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Martman.
Thank you, and I think I'd mentioned this before, but I'll just bring it up again, of course, the election signage. I wanted us to have a conversation around what that looks like.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thanks, Chair. I think this is a good place to start, and we did this the last time we were together, but I think we need to give staff a little bit more to go on in terms of what we're actually looking for and what our hoped for outcomes are with the GPC, because this is our meeting, and it's a lot of work for staff to compile these reports for us. So, and the other piece of that is that if we don't have topics fleshed out beyond 6 weeks, are we meeting for meeting's sake? Let's make sure that when we meet with intention and with hoped for outcomes, et cetera. So, thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. So with regard to the actual process of the topics of the GPC, would it be beneficial, for example, for the street entertainers, a fellow that I know has been involved downtown for a long time, has some ideas, and would it be preferable to actually put those to writing and have those presented at a GPC, or are we leaving it up to staff to prepare what they think the community either has told them, or in other words, are we gathering the information, or should we stay out and let staff do it? I'm quite capable, quite happy to sit down and discuss with the person I know and come up with some sort of a suggestion, if that's appropriate.
Thank you, Councillor Turley.
Mr. Chair, I'd suggest if you allow staff to go back and look at this schedule more. It's been a really busy couple of weeks for us, the last couple of weeks, so to focus on the scheduling for these items. And in terms of that particular item, I know that there is a community member that's interested in doing their own research on this, and I believe staff I haven't had a conversation with Mr. Lindsay about the timing of coming back to council, but clearly staff would have to have some involvement in because of the bylaws and that type of thing. So if we commit to you to have some more answers for these things on this list and a tentative schedule for you, then we would like to do that and do that for the March 8th meeting. And then you can decide if you need to get more information or submit it yourselves. So, and of course, if folks have specific, council is welcome to submit anything it wants all the time, but I guess it's just having a level playing field and making sure you're all comfortable with the expectations and that type of thing. So at this stage, it's still on us to deliver to you something that looks a little more robust and clear, and try to get some scheduling around this and some information. If we could flag some issues and questions around that, we'll try to do that. So we'll try to come back with a chart here on these topics. And I just remind you again that the Reimagine there's going to be a whole conversation around that schedule by itself this afternoon, just so we can anticipate as much time as going to be needed at certain times in that next few months. So that possibly might help us get to a clear conversation of what we're doing by the next meeting.
Thank you. Just a comment. I think definitely, we're entering into a new phase of the GPC where we're trying to batten down the process a little bit, and I think there are a few processes that need to be hammered out a little bit more clear. We have kind of a legacy list of topics that we've put out there already. I think my understanding was at the last GPC, we discussed that when we put forward an item that we'd like to discuss, there'd be a motion around it, and then also that would be submitted with that table being flushed out a little bit more, and that in that process of putting the motion forward and discussing it, I think that would serve us well to have a discussion of flushing out exactly what outcomes we want, so that it's not just a title of a topic we want to discuss floating there when it becomes sort of an official thing on our GPC list, that it's actually attached to a set of outcomes and what we're hoping to have, who we're hoping to invite. I don't know if that's been done yet with this whole legacy list of items, and so staff is going to go in the next 2 weeks and put dates beside these items, but on some of them I'm not even sure what we're trying to accomplish or not, and we kind of have to deal with that backlog. So one, I think that it'd be good to get feedback from staff in the next couple, at the next GPC. One, if some of these items have been worked on, when was there sort of a perceived date of coming forward, so that we've got a bit more information on them. But I think it'd behoove us to go through that list and actually flush out what we're trying to achieve, because maybe some items we can just take off, and then we can start afresh, that any new items coming forward, the council member will come prepared with a motion, a set of objectives, outcomes that they want to achieve, kind of fill out that table, so that we're starting sort of a little bit more formalized and focused. I don't know if anybody has any commentary on that, but I think that we kind of need to do that to kickstart things back into place.
So I think, Mr. Chair, that the clerk's office can send out an email to council reminding you and what the format is and that type of thing in advance of the next meeting. And again, I think if we had a more fulsome set of comments for each item, then you might be able to do what you said, check it off and decide how much time and what the priority is. So I think we're just one meeting away from actually having an informed conversation about this list and the status and the process. So I think Ms. Gurry's going to send out a note to you in the interim, just, talking about the process. If you had additional topics or any comments on each of these that you would like us to look at, we'll build that into the report or the submission for you at the next meeting, which is on March 8th.
Great, thank you. Councillor Turley, did you have anything more to add? Councillor Armstrong.
No, thank you. I thought that's what we were supposed to be doing at this meeting. I thought that's what we agreed on at the last one, so I did have my 3 topics ready with all my little stuff done. But going to Councillor Turley's spot, I think this was the place we decided this would be the place where community members could come to and talk and share in their concerns. So I think it's extremely important that once we get the schedule, that it gets posted, period, like, to our website, so people know and they can sign up to be delegations. And, and if it's, I think it's what, a 5-minute we use for that, and if it's something that's really big, maybe the chair would have the option of saying, because it's a big topic, we may go to 7 or whatever. But I think it's really important because we got rid of the cow, which was the place for people to come and speak. And with COVID, obviously that's changed a lot, but I think it's really important that, like the people that Councillor Turley's talking to have the opportunity to come and share it with all of council. And then we can ask the questions back, well, have you done this and that? Obviously staff has to have the report, which would be done first so that we know what we can and cannot do. And then the person would be there to also hear staff's report and follow up. So I think it's super important that we start involving the community more as hopefully COVID opens up a little bit more, but even if it be through Zoom or an email to all of us and whatever. And just further on the Zoom, this room does not work for Zoom at all, so it's better just to call in because you can't hear anything. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Rudolph, did you have any more commentary on that?
Sorry.
Great. To wrap this one up then, next meeting, staff's going to come with sort of a summary of what is tentatively scheduled a bit further out, and council members have got their homework to come with potential prior items that they'd like to discuss, prioritization, and Ms. Gurry will send out an email regarding a formalized procedure of getting items onto the agenda and what we kind of need to come prepared with. Great. Okay. Item B, report or governance and management excellence council resolution update. So was Ms. Gurry presenting, or Ms. Robertson?
I can speak on her behalf.
Okay, great.
The report before council is just a resolutions update, and the resolutions are council's business, and so what staff has done is prepared the resolutions and the status of what the outcome is. It's prepared in 2 parts, and the first part of the report, pages 21 to 102, are the items that have been completed, the action items, and then from pages 103 to 113 are the items that are in progress. So unless if council has any questions for any of the staff members regarding any of the items.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Robertson. Yeah, I was hoping to play this, but just if you have any questions regarding certain resolutions you'd like to inquire about with staff on their progress or other items, it's time to do it. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Question, staff, if I may, through you. In all the reports, or in this report, I'm looking at attachment B, the in-progress council resolutions. Some of them are marked with a blue background, and there's the last one's marked with a gray. Does that make any difference, or?
I don't see that there is any difference between the gray or the blue. It might be just the program that we use.
I think blue's in progress, gray is not
They're
started.
all in
yet.
progress. It's
Gray
just,
is not started.
oh, gray's not started.
Yes.
Yeah. That would be
But there are
Ben's
blue.
motion.
And
I'm
there
gonna ask
are
about
blue
it.
in both reports, some being completed and some that are in progress. But yes, gray is.
I'm thankful to have this in front of us now. I guess my other question then is, if I have any questions on the progress of a particular motion, I could then just approach staff, see where that's at. Because we have the assigned to person, obviously going through Mr. Rudolph. Is that appropriate? Maybe not. Oh, just wait.
Mr. Chair, we're here today to answer any questions on any of these, so you don't need to necessarily send an email to the staff. If we can answer it today, we'll do that. That's why we were prepared to do that. And if there's more questions that we can't answer today, and if the staff person isn't available, we'll certainly get back to you. But the idea was to allow that conversation to happen here. We've certainly spent a fair amount of time going over it the last couple of weeks just to make sure that it's accurate. But if it's in progress, what's that mean?
Well-
That's your question, yeah. So this is a great time to ask those questions. And if there's a lot of them, maybe we'd have to spread it over a couple meetings, but there's no problem there.
Yeah, my questions were beyond is, it's in progress, how far along is it? Again, this is not unlike the GPC agenda thing. I'm not sure how far staff is involved in down the road. Some of these may be wrapping up at the next council meeting, that sort of thing. And some have already changed from in progress to completed since this was created. So I'm just trying to figure out if there's some things that are way down, not getting, they're in progress has hardly started, just to understand why, and then look at some of these. My original idea here was that if some of these are quite onerous, or if there's some that we'd like to get more action on sooner, I guess that was the question, how to go about doing that. I think I'm trying to ask how to steer the ship here.
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner, there's a unique answer to each of those resolution lines. I don't know how easy it would be to document a date, an estimated date of completion, but certainly if there's any questions around any of these today, I suspect you don't have necessarily that question for all of them. We could answer that now. I believe the department should be able to answer when they anticipate that work is coming to council or it's complete. So, again, we could certainly go back and try to put that on paper so that it's very clear what the date is for all these resolutions. There's an awful lot of resolutions here. It's a lot of work. So just even getting ready to this level is a lot of work. So, if there's anything in this that you want us to answer today, we will certainly do that.
One that I keep driving by on a fairly regular basis, and I'm not sure where it is in this list, is the when we were looking at slowing some streets down or making some more streets more COVID friendly and allowing for people to walk, the Boxwood Road from a certain street to the roundabout came up. The idea was to make a walking lane across there. I drive by that area daily and see lots of people walking there, but there's no place to walk on the road. So I'm just wondering how far along that one is.
No, it's a great question. Mr. Sims should be able to answer that. I know there was Departure Bay, there was Georgia Way, there was a number of projects. Most of those have been done, or some aspect of it, and that one I can't answer, but I'm sure he can.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. That one, there's a number of the projects, like Departure Bay is a good example. We kind of got halfway done before the winter closed in on us. So we'll pick them up again here shortly in the next few months. So we should be able to address that one as well on Boxwood.
Okay. It's in the works. It's in progress.
But it is in progress for sure.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this list. I think it'll be great for the community to see just how much work staff is doing and continues to do. I do have two questions. Probably both were before, actually, maybe Dale can answer this one. It's the East Wellington Park, and that was the motion that for on 11/04/19. And I was just wondering how long it takes for the ALR to get back to us. That was where we were going to do the open house for the East Wellington Park Management and Action Plan. I think, oh, that's Mr. Harding, sorry, I guess all of mine are for Mr. Harding.
He's got the answer. I asked that question.
Sorry about that, Mr. Lindsay.
So Councillor Armstrong, we're actually, part of the engagement for the Reimagine, we also used that time to go out and get some more input from the public. So part of the Reimagine in the phase 2 of Reimagine, we're bringing all of that back together for the East Wellington Park. We're also doing some further research on the feasibility of it being agricultural. We're doing an agricultural assessment, and so that work's undertaken right now also.
And then my second one was the youth advisory, if we'd made any progress on that, or if we would just be looking at utilizing the local school advisory groups.
The youth advisory?
Yeah.
You know, so again, that's finding different ways, again, through Reimagine going out on that, but also it's one that we want to bring back to we didn't have the Accessibility and Inclusiveness Committee, so it's also a topic we want to bring up to that group on finding different ways for engagement, but also we'll do a bit of an update on that coming up.
And then my final one is the outdoor stadium. I was just wondering if talks have progressed with the school district on that.
Very much so, and I'm hoping to bring the report back to council in March. We've done all again, we went up with a lot of, utilized the engagements for Reimagine for a lot of our stakeholders groups, so I personally did all the interviews with the groups and also with the school board, so the school board's on side, all the sports groups are on side. We'll bring back a report for council's consideration.
Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. This is probably a question for Mr. Sims with regard to the Bay Street calming update between Glen Eyre and Departure Bay. And as I recall, there were temporary speed bumps there. And then I'm going by memory, which is always dangerous, that they were removed. And I'm assuming that the decision was made then to put permanent ones in. Is that?
Mr. Chair, excuse me, Mr. Chair, that's correct. That's one of it was a trial project, and then we did bring a report back to council to approve the installation of, I believe it was 2. We're going to treat them as raised crosswalks as well. So they'll be a good speed deterrent, but also be able to tolerate buses.
Thanks.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick comment, if I may, that I certainly appreciated getting this information. And I know that I've been guilty on more than one occasion of sensing that council makes a motion and staff goes away and then we don't hear anything about the file for some time. And I wonder what's happened with it, or is anything being done? And I think it's important to acknowledge that staff are continually working on these files as their time and capacity allows. So this is great information, and I hope we can get these updates on a regular basis, and certainly appreciate the work of staff on all the files. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. One more, I'm not picking on Mr. Simmons, but I just happen to be, got your name beside it. It's the council direct staff to report back to council on options for Nanaimo to participate in the provincial Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure pilot program for reduced residential speed limits. Do we know when that's coming forward?
Mr. Chair, we're actually awaiting action on the part of the Ministry of Transportation. I think they've got a couple of things in the queue in advance of the reduced speed pilot for releasing that call. And I think we've got a report coming to you in the next couple of months about micro-mobility. So that will precede the speed reduction ones. But it's there, but we're not really jumping on it until there's something to jump on, if that makes sense.
Is the micro-mobility one the last one there regarding motions for a bylaw to allow the operation of neighborhood zero emissions, or is that a different one?
That one is the smaller vehicles. Like I don't want to use the term golf carts because that's the zero emission neighborhood type vehicles that we're looking at as well.
Okay.
Some of this gets rolled into the active transportation plan as part of Reimagine Nanaimo. So we're doing that engagement. We're doing that thinking around that. So that's why we're not coming back with these individual reports all at once.
Okay, thank you.
That's it?
Mr. Chair, just if I might just add, one of the things that we would like to endeavor to commit to is more frequent bringing these back to council. So Ms. Curry and I have talked about aspirationally bringing them back on a quarterly basis instead of long-term, because it's a lot of work that go back over, and it would probably keep it more current if we were there every 3 or 4 months. So that will be the idea, is to get this back to you more often instead of these long gaps and finding out what the status of these things are. But again, any time there's a question on any of these items that you have either today or you think of it through, it's sort of a checklist of the ones that we have. And there's quite a few that have been complete, as you can see. So it's a bit of an inventory when it happened, what the issue was, and just sort of checking in with council to let you know it hasn't dropped off, it's just not been completed yet. So, and you can ask those questions at any time during these meetings or certainly in between.
Great. I think that it's wonderful having this report and list, and I think having a quarterly review of it is an excellent idea, and I look forward to that process being put in place. And I just had one question regarding the only gray item. The report on the timely implementation of the bylaw on zero emissions of vehicles. I'm just curious sort of where that is at. Mr. Sims, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We've been doing some research on it, and that it hasn't gone too far yet, I will confess, with the active transportation plan focus being our major focus in that group. Mm-hmm. But I'll poke it along a little bit if I can.
Excellent. Yeah, I guess my question forward is like, I guess in looking at it, was it determined that it required to be integrated into elsewhere, or like just the suggested bylaw kind of adopted by Qualicum and the other jurisdictions, that sort of, it requires a lot more research behind it to put it into the city than just sort of on the surface level? Or?
There's a couple of other moving parts with it. The bylaw 5000, the city's traffic and transportation bylaw, is due for a major overhaul, for one thing. There's another element of, there's a few other bylaws that are subject to some rethinking. So we didn't want to just drop yet another bylaw on top of the pile without making sure that we can incorporate it into that bylaw 5000 appropriately.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question regarding a motion on page 2 made by Councillor Armstrong regarding options for council to consider in order to permit residents to park on residential streets for more than 24 hours without having to move their vehicles. Could I have a status update on that one?
Mr. Chairman, I know that our bylaw staff are working with the active transportation staff collaboratively on that report. I don't have a time frame for when it's come back, but I know that there's been ongoing discussions.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions.
Kick me out, sorry.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. If I could go back to the residential speed limit thing, if I may. When I was doing the initial research, looking at what the other municipalities were doing, and I understood it as that the province was ready to implement another pilot project session, and that this could be an application. I was under the impression we had to put in an application. Has something changed on that? Because I'm noticing that's what they're doing down in Victoria and Saanich area.
Right, thanks. Mr. Chair, we checked in with that initial application and were told in no uncertain terms that we would not be welcome to participate in the Capital Regional District pilot program. And so the ministry, and I don't know the status of that one, but the ministry's telling us the order of release of these various pilots that they're, and it sounds like it's late spring before they'll issue another intake, I guess, for that particular one.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Nope.
Thank you for that report and the update on those items. And I think we'll move along here to the next agenda item, which is number 2, Health and Housing Action Plan Implementation. And Mr. Lindsay will be introducing this item.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will introduce it, but I suspect the co-chairs of the task force, who I'd like to acknowledge for their leadership and support through this process, may have something that they wish to add. But certainly, yes, Councillor Bonner and Councillor Hemmons, thank you both very much for all the work in getting us to this point. Mr. Chairman, this afternoon is simply an information report before GPC. You had, late last year, Dr. Turner actually made a presentation to you regarding the action plan. So our intent today was not to go back through the action plan, but to make sure that there was an opportunity to ask either staff questions or to hear from the co-chairs before this evening, where the recommendations of the task force, which last met on February 10th, will be showing up on your agenda this evening as consent items. Mr. Chairman, those recommendations are 1, finally endorse the action plan, and 2, generally establish what's been described as a transition group to help both with recommendations around governance and the establishment of this systems planning organization. So if council, through the consent items, those get adopted this evening, the next steps will be the establishment of this transition group. Staff will participate and help with that process. Those recommendations then would come back to council for final determination regarding the SPO and governance. So your worship, Mr. Chairman, unless there's any questions this afternoon, nothing further from staff.
Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I just have a few questions that were sent to me by people working in the field. I could just, one of the issues that came out from the report was that they said that it cost more to keep people in jail. However, when people did the math, it was $66,000 to do the chronic homelessness versus jail, which was $52,000. So people wanted to say that to them that was a huge error, that you're saying that it was cheaper to keep people housed than in jail, where actually when they did the math, it was cheaper to keep them in jail than housed. So I think that needs to be looked at just as a thing. I think probably it's just maybe, I don't know where that's coming from. And that came from people working in the prison system, actually, that were concerned about that. And then the other one that came forward from somebody is that there's been situations where entire healthcare teams who have been working on this have resigned off the projects, and there's been no follow-up with management or whatever to see why that happened. So I would like to see, and I don't know if it goes in this or if it would go when it goes to your transition team or whatever, that there be a place for that if you see that happening, that, you know, like the staff turnaround or whatever. Like, prime example was our CAT teams when we lost all of them, and nobody checked to see why they all left. So those are things I think that need to be maybe included in there. Like, is there a mechanism that you as the or I don't know if it'd be the SPO or your, I don't know which one, system PO, SPO or whatever, if that, who would be, but I think you should have a mechanism as a check-in on that. I think that would be really important, because if you go back to 2008 to that housing plan, that was extremely successful. It got us 3 subsidized housing units here, right? Like, which housed over 150 people. And it was a great group. And I mean, everything that's in your plan existed in that plan and was being done really well. And then there was a change in management and fell apart. So those are the concerns I have, because there's nothing new in any of the plans that I've looked at that haven't been addressed since the 1990s. But it becomes change in management that don't believe in the philosophies, or even you could get a change in council that doesn't believe in philosophies. And then where does it go? So I think there needs to be a built-in mechanism for that. And I didn't see that in the plan, so, and I think I did send that forward to Dr. Turner previously too, so she knew. So those are my concerns. Other than that, I have no problems endorsing. Thank you.
Direct Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. I would like to, at this opportunity, like to thank the work of staff on this project, also the work of BC Housing, the federal government, the province, Island Health, all of the agencies that are also participated on in this, Nanaimo First Nation as well, and then the First Nations Health Authority. A number of people participated in what was, I consider, a fairly lengthy task force in terms of time, but also a very important task force. I think it's pretty well, I think we can all agree that this is pretty well the #1 issue that we seem to be coming across our desk on a regular basis, regardless of how we think of it's going to be fixed. So I think I would like to take this opportunity to thank them for that. In addition to that, we've also received a number of input from members of the public, and I think it would be. I'm not looking to add them to this report or anything at this time, but I think there's some very definite issues I think that we need to look at in terms of vacancy controls, short-term rentals, and these are coming forward to council in different ways in the future. So I think that's something this council needs to look at as well as part of the overall work that we're doing, because it's been recognized in this report that close to 6,000 people are in core need housing, and that means that they're on the cusp of themselves becoming homeless. And I think that's something that we need to look at and look at the number of ways of how we can make sure that as a community, we're doing everything we can to prevent that from happening. So thank you very much. We made an awful lot of omelets with this one, and broke a few eggs along the way. So I'm thankful for everyone for sticking through it right to the end. I think the report that we have is a great step forward. And it's, a bit thinking out of the box, I think. I think that what's needed for this thing. And I don't know if Councillor Hemmons has. I hope she has something to add. So also enough. Thanks.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I think you covered most of it. Just deep gratitude to everyone involved, and a special thank you to staff. Dawn and I got to just show up to these meetings, and agendas were there and minutes were taken care of, and it was a really big group across a number of sectors, and so just really appreciative of everyone's work on this. It really is a different way of looking at this issue, and a different way of potentially solving it. So that was really necessary and important work, and I am really grateful that council selected or tasked Dawn and I with it. So thank you.
Excellent.
I just wanted to actually reference Councillor Armstrong's comments there. It's my view that the systems planner organization would, because it's a sort of an umbrella that coordinates all of the agencies, all of the partners, all of the funders that are involved in this thing, that in the event that something like that happened, they would know about it. And so I think that's where you might find your check there.
Thank you. Well, congratulations on everybody that worked on this project, and the recommendations from the Health and Housing Task Force in this report are very happy to see this completed and to go forward and work to be done on it. So the endorsement is excellent, and I think getting in place this transition organization, I just had a question around the timeline around that. Do we foresee it being about it said in the report 3 months before we'd see the organization put in place, or is that 3 months when we'd get a report back stating what the terms of reference would be, maybe?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our staff's estimate in the report is for time to bring the transition group together, have at least a couple of meetings with that group, and then bring those recommendations back to council for final determination. So we're hopeful we can have that done in 2 to 3 months.
Excellent. Any further questions or comments on this? Great. Oh, Councillor Bonner and then Councillor Turley.
Thank you. Through you to staff, if I may. We recently had an announcement from the province of $100 million available, and a good chunk of that money, I'm thinking, could be utilized to help this organization get on its feet and get up and running. Those applications, as everybody knows, have to be in by April. Do we have any plans to fast track some of this stuff so we can? Obviously, we're going to want to be putting in applications for the money.
Mr. Chairman, what I would say is, like many grants, they seem to be coming fast and furious right now, and I think the one Councillor Bonner is referencing just came out late last week, I believe, so when we first were aware of that one. So staff are in the middle of just reviewing that and seeing what opportunities, but certainly you would think some of the recommendations coming out of this report, we're hopeful could be eligible, but we'll report back to council.
Okay.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. I'm not sure who can answer this, but on page 27 of the report, there's a bullet that says a target of 51% plus of members at these tables should be Indigenous peoples. And I'm looking at the list of the different agencies that are proposed to be part of those tables, and I'm trying to, no matter how I think about it, I must be missing something, because I don't see how you can attain 51% when there's, in some cases, 10 agencies involved, unless all the agencies have Indigenous people with them that would be the people attending those meetings. I wonder if I could get clarification on that.
I think the intention is that that's our benchmark. We are, because of the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in the homeless population, we want to ensure that any resolutions or any solutions we find include folks who identify as such. And so the intention is at every point of the conversation to include as many Indigenous people as we can. However, I take your point that it might not be possible right away, and I think that's something that we have our eyes wide open on, but we still put it down as our goal in the plan.
Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe, and you're going to have to hit your mic there because I messed it up.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you, Chair. Am I on?
No, hold on here.
Hello, hello. It sounds like it. Thank you very much. Yeah, first of all, my thanks as well and acknowledgement to the two co-chairs, Councillor Hemmons and Bonner, for their work on this, their leadership, and of course to staff for the work they've put into it, along with the other partners and members of the task force. Appreciate it. I do have two questions. One, I think I know the answer to, and the other I should know the answer to. The first one is, because I know that only 3 years ago, Nanaimo went through developing an affordable housing strategy, and I think that was a valuable process with good information. And also there was the United Way-led action plan to end homelessness. And I'm hoping that those documents will be continually taken into account and acknowledged and referenced as the work of this task force goes forward. So I'll put that in, I'll put a question mark at the end of that statement and look for confirmation.
Thank you, through the chair, Councillor Thorpe. So we were mentioning earlier that we're getting close on the, I guess it would be now the second anniversary since the adoption of the affordable housing strategy. So our plan is to come back to council and have an update on that plan and in the sub-plan that was endorsed at the same time that you've mentioned. So whether that gets consolidated with a larger GPC around housing, which could tie in nicely with this plan, or separately, the intent is we're still working through that plan, still implementing it, and we will be coming forward in very near future to council on an update on it.
All right. Thank you very much. And my second question is related to money. Financial implications. Council has allocated $480,000 over per year for the next 5 years, I believe, to this project, and that's fine, $2.4 million altogether. So my question is that intended to come from taxation, or do we have other sources for that funding?
Through the chair to Councillor Thorpe, that was taxation. That money could be moved from a different source, but that was embedded in the financial plan that's coming forward for final adoption in council in May. So, we can certainly make changes to that, but it's been, I think we went through different words, and that's earmarked, protected, identified, but not necessarily committed, depending on, it's there if, depending on how council wishes to allocate that funding. I may be saying that slightly different than some of the two co-chairs want me to say it, but I think that's in essence the case, is it's been protected for use in that area. And how that is used will be subject to some decision-making process by council, probably not too distant future, I would think. Am I on the same page as the two co-chairs? Okay.
Thank you, and I wasn't looking to make changes to that. I just wanted to confirm my memory. Thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Through you, I just wish to extend my gratitude to everybody, to Councillor Bonner and Councillor Hemmons for leading the way on behalf of council on this incredibly complex and most important to me issue there is in this city and in our country for those people that are the most vulnerable facing health and housing issues. We've been working on it in this city for decades, and I'm just hoping that all this work that has come forth and the funding I'm seeing coming forward from provincial and federal governments, that in a decade we will see a healthy society where everyone is housed. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martman. Just one question regarding sort of one of the deliverables of the task force and the contract with Dr. Turner was the systems map. Is that available in any form to be seen, or curious just sort of where does that reside?
Through the chair. Oh, am I on?
Wish you can turn the light off.
You're on.
Okay, thank you. So the systems mapping was done through the use of a program called Help Seeker. And the intent of that, which some of you may have seen over the last few months, and that was accelerated during COVID, was to engage and map out all the different organizations who provide health and housing services in Nanaimo. And that program called Help Seeker, which is done through Dr. Turner's work, is intended to do not only just serve as a navigation tool for those who are seeking services for their clients, it also provides what's called back-end data where you can analyze and map which different organizations are doing different pieces of the work. So that piece we see, or perhaps I see the systems planning organization taking that and working with that. So although perhaps our idea of a map is a physical map, it is a digital online tool that maps out the different services, and in real time is intended to do things like have updates where each user would put, I have 2 shelter beds left, or I have X number of units. And so it's linked in with the idea of what's called integrated coordinated access to try and improve how our system works for those who have multiple needs. I don't know if that answers your question. And another step that may come forward is as part of the work of the systems planning organization, once we get through this transition team in terms of deliverables, is the potential to set up an actual workshop where people would be invited to attend, where they could all look at the implementation of the plan and say which part is theirs and map things out that way. So there's 2 different ways of looking at that mapping, but from the terms of the deliverable from Dr. Turner, that's what she gave us, was the Help Seeker tool.
Excellent. So yeah, that tool is there in that database, and then
That's right.
hopefully the SPO will take on sort of managing that, I guess. And great, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions. All right, thanks everybody for that one. And that brings us to item E, which is Reimagine Nanaimo Phase 2, introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just can turn it over immediately to Ms. Bhopal Singh. She just has a couple of slides to walk you through this afternoon to talk a little bit more detail about what to expect in the upcoming Phase 2 for the milestones. I'll turn it over.
Let's see. As part of your regular GPC update on Reimagine, you had last time a presentation on the outcomes of Phase 1, the engagement process that we went through, and today we're just going to spend a few minutes walking you through what you can expect through Phase 2 in your engagement. So you have, as part of your agenda, a handout that includes a very colorful chart with milestones that we have established. And you'll see in this that we've got all the different plans that are part of the Reimagine process that are being integrated. And in the top left, you'll see that the plus sign that looks a bit like the Swiss flag is where council will receive updates at GPCs and other council meetings. And then you'll see a star for where we see key decision points for council. So right now we are in February, at the February 22nd GPC, where we're going through the milestones. And as we speak, work is continuing and going forward on Council's direction to incorporate the donut economics framework into Reimagine. And you can expect on March 8th that we'll return to you, showing you how the donut economics framework will be integrated with Reimagine, looking at some examples of how we can do the donut in Nanaimo, customized. That might involve you directing us to change the name of the donut, pick another sweet, pick another round object, and then also to do something called the city portrait. And you will be getting a consent item related to developing the portrait at your council meeting from the Environment Committee. And that involves looking at targets and indicators as key to creating the framework or the portrait or snapshot of what our city is looking like in terms of environmental and social well-being. So I won't go through all of this in detail, but it's just to show you the game plan for where you will be involved as the steering committee for this process and where we will be involving different committees. So we'll outline this in more detail on March 8th, and in March you can also expect that we will be scheduling workshops with yourselves and members of different committees to get feedback on key pieces of this process, including what targets we have in existence, what targets we might want to use going forward for different social and economic goals and environmental goals, and then also looking at how we move forward with the donut planning process. And one thing I want to say is you've been receiving a lot of press coverage for your leadership on this, and what we hope to do in March is start making this process really fun. Climate change and some of the bigger topics we're trying to address are quite heavy. However, the direction we get from the donut economics folk is that this is part of almost a community building conversation and discussion. And so starting with you, we want to experiment with having some fun with some pretty important topics, but working you through that. And this will then lead us to a really key stage of Reimagine, which is looking at different scenarios for how we want to move forward with different goals that Council has given us through the strategic plan, through other direction you've given us, and then looping back to that Phase 1 rich data we've gotten from the community. And looking at what scenarios we want to move forward with the community on looking at with regard to future land use and policies. So things like the Health and Housing Action Plan inform this, the Food Security Plan, all of this feeding into the scenarios piece. So without too much further, I'm just going to then jump to, you'll see at the end of this chart here where we go into Phase 3, different options for plan integration. We don't know yet how that's going to look. That's going to depend on the feedback we get from you, what makes sense in terms of staff research, how the donut integrated framework looks. But what we've done there is just outline some ways we could really integrate these big strategic documents to be more in sync with the direction we're getting from you to integrate across all different sectors. So just examples there at the end. And with that, I'm going to just ask for your thoughts and any questions and comments you might have.
Questions for Ms. Bhopal Singh? Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. A question from the public regarding the charrettes. Obviously, a lot of people put a lot of input into Reimagine. How will participants of the charrettes be selected? And will neighborhood associations be receiving an invite?
Okay, excellent questions. So with regard to the charrettes, we had direction through the Environment Committee that will be coming forward as a consent item to Council. Based on that direction, we'll be looking at scheduling charrettes with members of the different committees. At this point, it's focused on the committees that are subcommittees of this steering committee, so the environment, accessibility, and inclusion. And that could include members of the neighborhood process. However, at this point, what we were thinking is that the charrettes are really getting into the more technical aspects of what indicators and targets we want to come back for community confirmation on and for using to evaluate the different scenarios. And where we see the broader community getting input is instead of giving them a huge array or list, that through the work with council and the committees, we refine that list of how we measure progress and what the priorities are based on phase 1, and narrow that down so that in phase 2, the work we do with you will lead us to come back to the community and say, here are a couple different options. Here are the lenses of looking at them through the donut economic lens for Nanaimo. What are your thoughts? What are your feedback? And how does that look in terms of whether you're a neighborhood association, whether you're a community member? How does that reflect the priorities you told us in phase 1? So that's where we saw that coming in. And then I think I may have not been here earlier, but we are also coming back to council with an opportunity for the neighborhood associations to be part of a conversation around governance. So based on direction from council around how we interact with neighborhoods on a governance level, and then tied to that is how we work with neighborhoods going forward to plan how they work as building blocks of this process. That being said, this is your process, so please provide us with feedback on what I just said.
A follow-up, if I may.
Yep.
Thank you for that answer. So I'm hearing you say that the charrettes will be with committee members only. So given that in July, identified there's a phase 2 engagement summary presented, between June, May, and April and March, is there any further opportunity for the public to be involved in this process?
Absolutely. So you'll see in the first page of the milestones chart that you have that we have engagement activities anticipated to start. I realize it's actually not very clear here, as clear as it should be. But going back to the community in April, May for feedback on where we reached with council and the committees on narrowing down one or more scenarios for people to pick between and give us feedback on, and also using the lens of the donut to evaluate how well does this scenario meet our objectives for different priorities related to community well-being and then environmental responsibility. So you'll see, if I'm able to, that right in here, we've got engagement continues, and then actually right up here, it says phase 2 online engagement starts. So that might be, depending on our timing, April, May, but that's where we see that. And again, that would be through the Get Involved Nanaimo, and we would continue to look at COVID-friendly opportunities. So that might be a session / mini workshop with neighborhood associations. So that would be the phase here. But a lot of the technical background work are with the experts on the Environment Committee and other committees and yourselves here, so that we're not flooding the community with an unnecessary amount of information. We've done that work for them by the time we come back.
Thank you.
Mayor Krogh.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to extend my thanks to Ms. Bhopal Singh and everyone who's been involved in this process to date. It is a massive undertaking, and I just want to state the obvious, given that it's proceeded so well and been so comprehensive and with such incredible participation during COVID times is a bit of a miracle in and of itself, and so that wouldn't have happened without incredible extra effort. And I just want you to know I suspect we're going to come up with a series of recommendations that will be implemented by council at some point that will represent the very changed city that we are. I have recently seen a little bit of pushback from some folks around the issue of us hitting the 100,000 mark, and growth is bad, and, you know, we have to resist this, and this isn't what we want. And I guess my comment on this is we are not the little town we used to be, and people want to live here for very obvious reasons, and how we manage and channel that growth and develop a city that reduces as much as is reasonably possible our individual carbon footprint is the goal of this council, and should be the goal of, I think, with respect, every thinking citizen who wants to raise a family here and live here. So again, my sincere thanks, and I'm delighted to see this process continue and look forward to its conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Krog. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, if I may, to staff, I'm looking at the end of this, right? The December, January, February time period, and we have a public hearing and bylaw adoption in January. I'm wondering if there's a way to. I know we've had a lot of public engagement and input into this thing at the beginning, but we've done that before, and then when the final bylaw comes out, everybody had a different idea what was going to happen. And then, so is there any way for us at that time, because this is going to be moving us forward for the next decade or two, that once the initial ideas of this bylaw are available, that we could at that point do more public engagement using our, our platform, Bang the Table, that sort of thing, to just get more feedback from people on what they think of what these are. Because I can't see a public hearing happening and everybody that wants to talk about the next 20 years that we're now setting up having an opportunity to do that at a public meeting, a hearing sort of thing.
Okay, through the chair to Councillor Bonner, we did anticipate that's a very important step. And so through phase 3, so after phase 2, where we gather feedback from the community and also other government partners and stakeholders on where they see the scenarios, the idea would be that the different options on the table might be combined, or maybe there's one preferred one that happens to be more intuitive, is that we would then use that feedback to draft the final plans. So basically the basis of what would go in bylaws. And then we'd come back to the community in phase 3, aiming for December. Again, this is a very ambitious timeline, but aiming for December with the opportunity for people to give engagement at that stage on that draft. And then we take that feedback and incorporate it in our recommendations to council on the final document. And then the public hearing then is just one further step for those who might not have given feedback in phase 3 to come back with further edits or suggestions. Does that answer your question?
It does, and if, yeah, it does, thanks very much, appreciate that. You don't have to answer this question in the way I would think that might be answered, but I'm going to put you on the spot, if I may, right? Because you did mention our donut model that we've adopted, and you did mention the Health and Housing Action Plan. So I was wondering, how does staff view that plan within the donut model, and how do you plan on implementing it, or your ideas to implement it if council votes on it?
Okay, so as the steering committee, you'll have a major say in this. And one of the ways we envision this happening, and not only with the Health and Housing Action Plan, but other plans like Age-Friendly Nanaimo, other plans that you've either endorsed or been part of, is to look at what are the key metrics coming out of those plans that you've already endorsed, whether they're targets and indicators to measure progress towards them, and then coming back to you and saying, okay, what do we need? What makes sense in terms of these big strategic documents that we're integrating, whether it's the official community plan integrated with Parks, Recreation and Culture, and what are policies that help us move towards these metrics and targets? So I hope I'm not speaking in too much of a technical way. But luckily for us, having the Health and Housing Action Plan done provides us with a huge step where you've already endorsed this, and then you would then be confirming as we attempt to say, here are some ways of addressing it in this strategic way going forward. So influencing land use, Health and Housing Action Plan we might come up with suggestions around changes in our designations of land use for things like affordable housing, institutional uses for health, for example. Or we may look at things and say, hey, this is already working in this area of town, but in this area of town, we need to see something different. What does that look like? And what does that look like in terms of policies that impact neighborhoods, corridors, and our town centers? So it very much plays a very key role, and we have the benefit of having recently gone through the Health and Housing Action Plan, so it's fresh in everybody's minds. And then looking at, particularly the parts of the action plan where council have a very direct influence, and looking at how we can move those forward within our mandate and legislation through local government. Please interrupt me if I'm not being clear.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'm going to go wax a little bit more philosophical here. We've had a lot of conversation about strategic planning and is it necessary and does it need to be updated and that sort of thing. And this may be a political question, so feel free to dodge it if you like. Is it possible that the adoption of the donut model could be the strategic plan going forward, that you actually don't need a strategic plan if you're working within the donut economy?
I see Mr. Lindsay has his hand up.
Mr. Chairman, I think very good questions, and I think we're excited about coming back, as Ms. Bopal saying, on March 8th and talking about some of these very points. I'll give you a little bit of a hint. Yes, I think one, your existing strategic plan works very well integrated into the existing donut framework, and we'll explain some more of that on the 8th. Mm-hmm. Just as does your Health and Housing Task Force. Like if you look at the social framework under the donut, being inside of that, both health and housing are key components that we have to be successful of, so people can thrive in that middle area. So absolutely, I think it relates well, and we'll expand on that. The other thing I wanted to mention, maybe just while I have the opportunity, is the dates we have in front of you. This is staff's attempt at putting some targets in our plan over the next few months. At the end of the day, this is council's process. So if we get to October and November and we've done some engagement and council hears feedback that no, we want more, or we want an alternate, or we want greater opportunities, absolutely there'll be opportunity to course correct at that point and do some more consultation. So I didn't want to give council the sense that this is the plan we're moving forward. It's definitely a living document at this point, but one we're going to work towards over the next 12 months.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Ms. Bopal Singh. I'm just curious, you mentioned the charrettes, and you mentioned neighborhood associations and committees, and I'm wondering, given the time frame of when it's likely to happen, there could potentially be some that are missed, and I'm thinking more of the task forces that have actually completed their mandate, but the committee or the advisory committee or the agency has yet to be formed. Is there any thought being given to including those groups of people?
I think we'd be looking to direction from council for that, because of course council members have been the chairs of those committees. And so the other thing to note is that due to COVID, we're going to have to be quite creative around the technology we use to do charrettes. Ideally, charrettes take place with a huge huddle of people in a room around paper, sharing pens and all types of different pieces. And so we're going to have to be quite creative around how we do that, using maybe a combination of online and in person. The other piece, though, is that just because these charrettes are being held with the committees and yourselves as the steering committee doesn't mean that there won't be opportunities to have smaller conversations with groups who represent a sector. So, for example, the health sector or the housing sector. So it is quite possible for us to do that, much as we did provide those opportunities in phase one for organizations and groups to do that. And that's what I foresee with the neighborhood associations, for example.
Great, thank you. Councillor Turley, I kind of had similar commentary just around the charrettes. I think that the Health and Housing and the Economic Development Task Force, was a gathering of folks representative of a certain sector of the community, and I think it could be very helpful, just as sort of with the Environment Committee, to have a discussion on indicators and targets with that group of folks that are representative and experts in the field to a certain degree. Even though that the Health and Housing Task Force and the Economic Development Task Force have been disbanded, I guess if it is possible to draw those groups together for a discussion, I think that would be interesting and helpful for the process. And I know there was some discussion at the Environment Committee about, how can these, when you do look at the donut, these committees that we have developed are representative of a bit of a cross-section of that, following our strategic plan as well. But to have a conversation amongst these groups too, to sort of flesh out, integrate across, economic development, the environment, health and housing, social issues, to come up with really some of the technical background of what are the targets and goals that we're going to be setting as a community, so that information can go out to the wider community for feedback and input on. So I know staff are contemplating how to set up the charrettes right now, and will come back to us with what they feel is the best way forward, but those are a few of my thoughts on that.
True, Councillor Gaspar, as the steering committee, if you'd like us to include the members of those task forces, we can certainly do that. One thing, and come back to you on March 8th with a bit of a verbal update, one thing we do have to look at is the technology that we're using and what the limits are in numbers, and if there are no limits, then there is a way of us facilitating that through an online way. Mm-hmm. And our wonderful consultants, Lanark, are experimenting with how we do breakout sessions and things within a software or a couple of different software options. So if we can take that direction from you as the steering committee and come back to you on March 8th, that would be much appreciated. Is there, in terms of direction on that, I mean, I think that, the fundamental crux of the donut economy model is that it's a framework that does really set the goal posts and goals for the community when you're downscaling it. And so that discussion of what our targets and how we're going to measure our progress is a really fundamental aspect that I think is going to inform the scenarios of our OCP and what, as a community, we're deciding to shoot for. And so an in-depth conversation on that, I think, is important. And in terms of direction from council on including in that charrette process the Economic Development Task Force and the Health and Housing Task Force for a session, I'm curious on what other members of council's opinion is on this. Oh, it's right in front of me. Councillor Turley.
No,
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my only thought is this could be quite significant, and I would not like to see us limit participation or input to certain groups. I think the entire community, as much as possible, needs to be heard from on this. So I don't know how that works or how we could encourage that, but I think I would be opposed to simply saying, well, we should invite these people and this group and people from this group and possibly ignore others that may wish, in fact, to be heard. That's my only thought.
Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, I agree that it needs to be a really broad base. I don't think we should make it a small base. I think it's really important that we hear from as many people as possible because it affects everybody in the community. So I think it needs to be, whoever wants to speak to it, speaks to it. Thank you.
Okay. through the chair, if I could respond. So one of the reasons for doing the charrette with like members of the Environment Committee and task force with task force members or people with specialized interests is it allows us to really refine the information that we think we want to go to the wider community with. And it's not that the wider community wouldn't get an opportunity, but I will say that going through the process of selecting targets and particularly indicators to measure can be a very unwieldy process. And our hope is that with your help and with the help of the committees that we make it meaningful and come up with measures that really help us with the monitoring process that you've directed us to look at through the Reimagine process. So the idea of the charrettes is to really have that more focused conversation, but it certainly does not mean excluding the wider community and the feedback that comes from what you tell us with how we proceed with phase 2 engagement. So it's about how do we keep that manageable, but phase 2 engagement, in fact, there are some people who said, oh, you've done phase 1 engagement, great. I'm like, no. The purpose of the phase 1 engagement was to raise people's awareness so they give input at phase 2, which is the critical phase, where we start considering what are the options on the ground to move forward with. And so our hope is that we don't lose that momentum, but what we need is the guidance of yourselves as the steering committee and others to shape that phase 2 engagement.
Follow-up?
So that's my concern, and you said it, special interest groups. And that's my concern with the charrettes. You're only going to special interest groups. And that's what you said in your comments, and that's my concern, because, you know, I could go and pick 5 groups that are all from the right, and you're going to get absolutely not. Then you can get 5 groups from the left that best things in sliced bread. Then you can get the middle where you're going to get mixed. So that's my concern when you start utilizing special interest groups, and that's why I agree with what Councillor Thorpe said. I think it's a big mistake just to use one specific group. Thank you.
Just to jump in here, I think, you know, I hear the concerns of Councillor Armstrong and Councillor Thorpe, and I think we're maybe misunderstanding the process. It's not so much a special interest. It's, you know, with this city portrait process, we're having to identify indicators for progress and targets in certain spheres. So, you know, one of the spheres is the environment. And so when you're looking at indicators, it's quite technical. It could be, you know, percent of permeable surfaces in your city for a certain metric, you know, for hydrology. And these are things that need to be discussed to see what other cities are doing and what is possible. And that's sort of like the first filter for these more complicated questions that then need to be set up to go out to the community for the opinion on, you know, what is the target, you know. So we're going to measure it in a certain way, but what is the target of what we're trying to achieve? And so if we just go straight out to the community, we won't really have anything to riff off of. There won't be anything to provide to the community to provide input on, and it becomes very unwieldy, and it's really just left up to staff and to council to come up with that information that really does require a bit more technical input of the likes of, say, what the Health and Housing Task Force has spent 4 months, you know, a year working on. And so as it stands right now, the groups that we have that are providing some information just to build what we're going out to the community with is the Environment Committee and the Social Inclusion Committee, which you sit on, Councillor Armstrong. But because it just so happened that these other task forces were disbanded, they're no longer official committees, so we can't utilize their knowledge to help with the process of figuring out what we're going to go out to the public with. And so I think that if we don't include them, we're going to be missing out of valuable input of groups that we've all chosen. We've all sat down and chosen who we want members to be on the Economic Development Task Force and the Health and Housing Task Force. And we can just utilize our input to help with that process of putting together this map of indicators and targets that then would go out to the public. And so, yeah, I don't think that there's fear of missing from input from the left or the right or however we want to categorize it. everybody will get to have their say, but they need to have their say on something that could be difficult just for staff and, the council to come up with on our own, without input from these valuable committee groups, so.
Again, my concern again, because I've heard from many in the business community and development community that they've had no voice in this, no say. It's having an impact on them already. So I would like to see them be part of that, because you can't always choose people that believe in the model. You need to have people that are against the model and aren't sure of the model to have a proper assessment. And that's my concern. Like if you load the model with people that really believe in it, you're not going to get a proper risk assessment done. So you need to have those people that have issues with it, that they're at the table so that those can be addressed as well. I mean, if we want to see our city thrive, you need buy-in from everybody, just not one small group. And so I think it's really important that these charrettes do include people that may not believe in the model, that are experts in GDP, whatever you want to use, that can speak to some of the issues with it. And there's a lot of issues with it that from people in the economy groups, there's mixed, right? You got a small group that believes in that, and then you got a massive group that believes in GDP. So I think it's really important, because until governments change the way of measuring success by using a GDP, we got to be really careful on that. So I really think it's important that those groups also be included in your charrettes, or you've already biased your whole setup for the community. Thank you.
Councillor Bartman.
Thank you. Through you, I'm hoping to Councillor Armstrong. I haven't heard any concerns from the community, so I'm just hoping that perhaps you could share when you receive these concerns or emails. Perhaps you could get permission to share them with all of council, so that we may be able to talk to these people, or maybe address any concerns or misconceptions. Because at this time, I've had no negative feedback, I've had all positive feedback.
To that, you can look in the letters to the editors. There's all sorts there. There's all sorts of comments there. There's all sorts of numerous Facebook groups. So I guess it depends on which groups you belong, where you're at. I will certainly start sharing emails, but again, it has to be with the permission of the individual. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Just to move the conversation around, I'd like to move that the Health and Housing Task Force and the Economic Development Task Force be included in the charrette to identify target indicators. Seconded, Director Hemmons. I'll speak to it. I think just as a recommendation from the steering committee, I think inclusion of these groups will just help as the initial filter to be able to provide something meaningful for the community to provide feedback on. And they've been working hard on aspects of the economy and our social response. And yeah, it's important that we utilize that expertise and work that's happened. Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. So my concern with this motion is that, to me, it implies that those groups will be invited and therefore other groups will not be, because they're not part of this motion. And if that's the case, I can't support it for the reasons that I've already explained. And this council was very keen at the start of our term on public engagement and public involvement. And I think in this case, especially maybe in this case for such a major project, that the more community involvement from whatever side or end of the political spectrum they may be from is really important. So to me, this motion is exclusive, and I don't object to these groups being involved, but I don't see the need for the motion. They can be involved as long as others are involved as well. So I hope I've explained that adequately, but for that reason, because to me it comes across as exclusive, I don't think I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Mayor Crow.
Thank you very much, Chair. With respect, the motion references the Health and Housing Task Force being asked to participate. The Health and Housing Task Force has provided its report, I think, from quote-unquote a legal, and I don't wish to appear pedantic, perspective. The Health and Housing Task Force work is done. And I'm inclined to agree as well with Councillor Thorpe that when we are asking what exactly you're asking for. Are you asking them to have a meeting and have a vote? Are you asking the chairpersons of the committee, the two co-chairs, are members of this council, to then present to themselves, so to speak? I just think it's a well-meaning, and I don't mean that sarcastically, it's a well-meaning motion, but I think, like most things that come up very quickly during the course of a discussion, much better to think this through or consider it for some other day, or really think about the impact of it, because I really have some concerns about it. Given what I presently understand, and given the intelligence and the ability of the staff who work for this city to, how shall I say, gather and put together all of the viewpoints that are necessary to give us appropriate recommendations, I don't see this as a useful step forward, so I won't be supporting the motion.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up on something that Councillor Thorpe said, we're all really concerned with engagement. We all really want the public's input, particularly in our largest engagement piece of our term. So I think we're all heading in the same direction. We want the same thing, and what I understand this motion to be is clarifying that members who have been involved in our committee work and therefore hold a different set of knowledge and expertise around things like the environment, economic development, health and housing, that we're going to ensure that those folks are included, to ensure that when we get that framework up and going, that the indicators that we're using to measure our progress are actually embedded in day-to-day reality. So that's why I'm supporting this motion. I don't think it is exclusive. I think it's just an addition to. We want everyone's input on this, and we're saying we want our experts on those committees also inputting. Thank you.
Through the chair, I hope I'm not disrupting the process of discussion. If I could explain why, when you endorsed the terms of reference for this, that we had you as the steering committee, and then we had all the different committees that you'd endorsed represent, versus taking one person for environment to sit on the committee using the whole. The idea behind having the committee's feedback in the charrette is to really help staff, so that, because we are tasked with narrowing down a vast amount of data into something that's meaningful and manageable for the community to give feedback to. And we could try and do that on our own, and we're doing a lot of that work. But the thought behind the charrettes is to work with yourselves as representatives of the whole community in the steering committee, and then whoever you direct us to with the subcommittees that you've endorsed, to give us a bit more of that technical feedback and check before we go out to the wider community. So it wasn't ever intended to be exclusive, but as a way of helping refine the work the staff might otherwise have to do on their own before preparing for phase two. And phase two is intended to be extremely inclusive and allow for conversations with smaller groups, much like we did with phase one. But it does require us making things that are quite technical, understandable, the pros and cons of different options for land use, on the well-being of the community, and different policies. So I don't know if that helps, and I'll just stop there.
Thank you. Ms. Robertson, and then I've got Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In line with which Mayor Krogh was highlighting that the Health and Housing Task Force has concluded, so has the Economic Development Task Force. It's now off to the new entity. So if this motion were to proceed forward, it would be helpful to have clarity as to or some specifics around who, with both those committees, concluded now.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to whoever fixed the audio. It's working much better, so thank you. I won't be supporting this motion, just because I think, as highlighted, those two committees have been disbanded. But later tonight on the council agenda, in the consent agenda, as referenced previously, there is the direction to form a charrette. It's nice, broad language. I think it stems well, flows well out of the Environment Committee recommendation, or discussion there was very much touching on the points around inclusion, and that the Environment Committee did not feel that when you adopt a holistic model that you can do so, develop these indicators in isolation. And so the motion there is meant to reflect that and task staff with designing a charrette process. If I understand everything correctly, that charrette process will include a broad spectrum of people, but obviously be limited in scope because charrettes are intensive and you do want people participating in a really deep level, and you obviously can't get that from a huge number. But from there, they will, obviously whatever comes out of that will inform the engagement and go out to the community. So I kind of feel like we're overthinking this a little bit by trying to add things and also by maybe not feeling comfortable in doing it. I think we should fully trust staff here to design that charrette process, figure out, obviously that's going to come back to council, figure out who's going to be invited, and then whatever the outcomes of that charrette process will undoubtedly be pumped out into the second stage of engagement here, which will solicit hopefully as much public feedback as we received so far. So I won't be voting against it. Depending on what happens later tonight, I will be voting in favor of the consent agenda, and I hope that we can just trust the process that is underway here, because it is meant to be fully inclusive and will include as many people as possible, but also be intense enough to really hammer out the importance of these indicators and do so in a good way. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Martman.
Thank you. In consideration of the conversation that has been occurring and understanding the intent, I believe, of the motion, I'm wondering if the movers might want to just withdraw the motion. Because I think at this time, with the charrette process, that what we need to do is encourage and motivate the right people and all people to be involved in this and to be engaged. And I don't think the task force, which had their own mandates and have concluded, we need to get the people that were on that task force to hopefully stay engaged and want to be engaged. But I'm uncomfortable with the idea of us defeating a motion that was inviting people, and therefore my preference is we just withdraw the motion, period. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
That's not a bad idea. Well, and I think the idea of the motion is to invite them and not exclusive of anybody else, but just make sure that when we do create this charrette, the least we could do would invite them. I know the members of the Health and Housing Task Force, and at least half of them would not participate in this because it's not their mandate. So some of them don't even live in this part of the world. So I'm thinking that probably a withdrawal and just carrying on, and as Councillor Brown said, trusting the process tonight might be not a bad idea.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. I think that the important intent, and I appreciate Councillor Martman, is that some focused discussion amongst individuals that have a bit more expertise and time spent focusing on social issues or on economic development, and given that we have two reports and plans with recommendations that are newly minted, and we're trying to integrate our city plans into the larger OCP process and the city portrait, that these two pool of people would be well suited for that more technical discussion. Do not want to risk excluding individuals from that discussion, but I think just in terms of process forward, having a more in-depth discussion in a shred is important. And so as long as staff, I was hoping to make it easy on staff that there's already a set pool of people that can provide this to go ahead with that. But if it overcomplicates with fears of exclusion and maybe stepping too far into operations, I'd be happy to withdraw the motion. And I think the intent is understood, and there is the report in the consent agenda. So I will withdraw the motion. And the seconder agrees, and we will carry on.
because as our steering committee, this is exactly the type of conversation we need from you and direction we need from you and debate. And it happens in a formal setting like this, but essentially the steering committee of any process would have this type of conversation and then direct staff. So unless there's any other thoughts or comments on the milestones, I was going to go to the last slide.
Councillor Bonner, you're on the screen here. Did you have
No,
Okay.
Okay. And I would like, through the chair, to reiterate what Mr. Lindsay said, that this chart is a draft chart, and every time you see it, it will say draft, and you may tell us you need to add things, you need to change dates, you need to lengthen that, and so this is our attempt to put milestones before you. There may be unexpected things that either accelerate us or delay us, particularly around our current pandemic situation with certain things. We hope not. We've done a valiant effort in phase 1 to overcome that. So we think we've learned a lot in engagement during phase 1. So just note that every time you see it, it will be draft, and you may add to it or make suggested changes to the dates. So.
Quick question just on options for feedback there. Was that for today, that discussion on sort of the degree of integration, I guess, of the bladder? Is that something for council to think on?
That is something that we wanted to show you will evolve, but we have to start as staff kind of considering it. However, we will bring this back to you, and there's a lot of work yet to do with getting your feedback and other feedback related to the donut framework and what makes sense going forward with scenarios, because that will really flesh out if any of these options are feasible. So it was just to show you, so you started thinking towards the end point, what were the possibilities? And there's many more than we've got up here. So.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah. And so with that, at the end of every GPC, I thought we'd leave you with a focus on, we had so many people submit really beautiful entries of artwork as a way of communicating Reimagine. So as the one today, we picked Connie Paul, who some of you may know is a nurse who's worked for many years with Snuneymuxw First Nation. She's from another territory, and I'm afraid I can't quite remember which one, but we know Connie very well, and she does beautiful artwork, and if you've ever seen her in meetings, she's often doodling and sketching while in meetings, and she also put words to go with that. So I'll just leave that there as a thought, and with that, I will stop.
Thank you for that. That's a nice slide to end the conversation on. So with that, moves us to the last item on the agenda, Canada Healthy Communities Initiative. Ms. Lagan.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide Council with information on 2 potential projects that are for the federally funded Canada Healthy Communities Initiative, and to obtain a Council resolution, as the first intake is March the 9th, just 1 month after the announcement of this grant opportunity. Our recommendation is that the Governance and Priority Committee recommend that Council direct staff to submit an application to the Canada Healthy Communities Initiative for the E and N Trail Lighting Project. Quick background, it's a $31 million fund that has 2 intakes. The first intake very quickly coming up with the deadline of March the 9th. It was only announced on February the 9th. We brought a number of staff together. We considered options that best fit the assessment criteria and that have been discussed as important both to Council's strategic plan as well as in the Reimagine campaign and other public engagement that we have undertaken. The Healthy Communities Initiative has 3 theme areas, one being safe and vibrant public spaces, the other improved mobility options, and finally digital solutions. Eligible projects have to be completed by June 30th of 2022. There's 2 intakes, as I mentioned, and each one is an application for 100% of funding, so there's no matching required, and it's up to $250,000. The E&N Trail is what we're recommending, but we'd also given serious consideration to the Hart Bridge replacement, as well as any others that council would like to bring forward. Importantly, the E&N Trail is an all ages and ability, or an AAA, active transportation link between Rutherford Country Club, the hospital, and downtown mobility hubs. It effectively completes active transportation for walkability and bikeability north of downtown. The $250,000 would light approximately 750 meters, and the light fixtures would have the ability to put community art in banner form on them as well, really enhancing that corridor. The second option was the Hart Bridge replacement. This is a bridge that exists as a pedestrian footbridge over the Millstone River, and it connects Riverside Drive with an existing trail system in the northeast corner of Bowen Park. It's 1.4 meters wide. The replacement would make it 4 meters wide, and would allow for socially distanced crossing over and a cross-section for various users, and a reduction in approach grades would support accessibility. So quite an upgrade to that particular bridge. We anticipate that it would be $250,000 as well. So the options before you are lighting and art banners for 750 meters of the E&N Trail, or the Hart Bridge replacement project, or a different project of your choosing. That's
Great.
my report.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Sorry, I accidentally left my hand on.
I have mine up.
Oh, so you do not have a question.
No, he doesn't.
Councillor Armstrong.
I would like to, because we only have a minute left, I'd like to move option number 1. It's, no.
Good. Okay. Moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Hemmons. Did you want to speak to it?
I just think it hits all the boxes. It's going to have a bigger impact for the whole community full-wise, and it's, I think it's a project that's sadly needed. So that would be my rationale, that it has a bigger impact on the whole community.
Great. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in favor of this option, and probably both of them, as a matter of fact. My question is, when I was talking with Parks and Rec about lighting the E&N Trailway about a year and a half ago, I was told it was a $2.5 million project. If we're going to light this part, if we do get the grant and we do light a portion of it, is there any plans to light the rest of it?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner, we had a discussion about that with the larger group, and representatives from both Public Works and Parks and Recreation were at the discussion. And what we liked about this is it starts the momentum and it's scalable. So we can actually light 750 meters for the $250,000, and then light another section, because they're in closed circuits and they require a repetition of the capital infrastructure. It's not just one long extension, so it's a really good modular project for us. And as far as future lighting, I do not believe at this point in time that it is in the plans, although perhaps someone from Parks and Rec or I am correct, yes. It's not in, additional lighting's not in the plans today.
And are we talking solar lit, solar powered?
I don't know the exact specifications.
Mr. Chair, sorry to leave Ms. Legan hanging there, but no, these would be an electrical circuit from BC Hydro. So as Ms. Legan was intimating, it was discrete circuits from BC Hydro.
So we'd be running electrical lines up.
Correct. That's correct. Yeah. The main rationale is that the time of year when you really need it is wintertime, when there's less opportunity for solar charging. Excuse me.
One other comment I had is we don't have other options that, like, part of it is, council can choose their own project, but we don't know what they are, and I don't know what didn't make the cut. So I don't know if that's an option for future reports and say, these are the two we've chosen, and these are the ones that are close, but not quite.
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner, thanks for bringing that up. We did identify these two as fitting the criteria and being able to, for us to be able to respond quickly for the March 9th deadline, but there is a second intake, which is scheduled for April, and we plan to bring a long list forward to council for you to debate. So we needed more time to dig a little deeper with respect to additional projects.
I would be quite keen on seeing things that connect our grid of active transportation, that connect pieces that are disconnected. That's kind of what I'd be looking forward to.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. I thought long and hard about these two options, and I have walked the N Trail, particularly that portion between Northfield and Dorman Road, and at night, and there is, in my opinion, given my aging eyes, significant ambient light that I'm not convinced that that's the best way to spend the money. However, the other option, the Lenhart Bridge, given that we're putting a new trail over the upgrade of sewer and water through Bowen Park that apparently is going to be lit, I think probably will attract more traffic, and that's the one tie that is from that side of the millstone to the other side of the millstone within proximity of that trail. So I'd be all in favor of the Lenhart. I'm not so sure I'm in favor of the ENN. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. I'm not seeing any other speakers. I have a question around grants, but maybe we'll call the question here and then ask in general. So all in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? Councillor Brown, are you in favor or opposed? In favor. Okay.
In favor.
Yeah, unanimous. Councillor Turley opposed. Thank you. Motion carried. Just a quick question around grants. I think that this year we're going to see an onslaught of grants, and this one definitely didn't give us a lot of turnaround time, and we do have a bit more heads up. But my question is, do we feel like properly resourced to be able to handle like an increased flow of grants to take advantage sort of probably a lot of money that will be made available for the municipality?
Go ahead.
That's, Mr. Chair, that's an interesting question. I think so. It's just interesting, you get these quick deadlines, so you get the concept of shovel ready, but it really depends on the criteria that they put into these grant applications and the amount and so forth. So we would like to come back to you with a list of the grants that we know that are either active and we're waiting for an answer, or the ones that are pending. And there's almost coming out at 1 and 2 a week, even not grants, but monies available through different agencies. So I think I would like to add this to the next GPC as a topic where we could give you the macro list of the grants and where they're at and what's pending and what our opportunities. And I think we could be resourced, but it does take time to get deep. The thoroughness of the grant submissions, perhaps the folks that do that could share with you the details that go with one of these submissions, just so you get a flavor of that, because it's usually quite a bit. And then there's a lot of follow-up, but there's a whole bunch of, and if it's a very small grant, you ultimately get to the point where you question whether it's worth the effort to get the dollars. So we can furnish you with a chart, a summary list of all the grants for the next meeting. We can talk about where they're at, and we can also talk about the resourcing. And we have somebody in the finance department whose challenge is to manage that portfolio, but you can only do so much, and so maybe we do have to find other resources to resource ourselves better and to be in a better position. But yeah, it's a great question. But I think the immediate point is what's in the queue, what's coming, what do we know is out there, and how do you identify your priorities? It's just, this one was such a quick turnaround. It just didn't present, what can you get going really fast? So.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was at this table or the RDN, but I do believe that it came up when, should we be looking for, more individuals focused specifically on grants and that. And I guess, when that report comes that you're saying that you're going to bring to council, like if there is identified that, maybe that we could use more people that, on this, especially during this period of time to make the most use of this money that hopefully will be coming towards our communities or available, just to, please let council know.
Yeah, that's a great question. We'll just there is a summary chart that's circulating. I've seen it. We just went over it last week, and now it's out of date already because there were 2 new additions there this past week. So just get that in front of you. We could talk about the resourcing, the timing, and then options and so forth. We do have several that are waiting for a decision, like the Harewood turf field and that type of thing. So we can come back and, as an information item at the next meeting, go over that. So the GPC on the 8th sounds like we now have the amenity project, the Reimagine, which is a fairly robust discussion around the donut infusion into that, and now this. So this is how we build agendas.
Great. Ms. Ligon?
Through the chair, if I could add also, there is a significant amount of work that the finance department does with respect to getting information from the balance of the organization to put these grant applications together. And then once they are awarded, hopefully we're very successful on the number of grants, then there is the pressure on an already fully resourced budget with a number of projects. And so having that capacity within the organization all the way through is going to be one of our biggest challenges. So having some capacity in the organization would serve us well over the next several years. And I'm not sure we actually have that, given how lean we are. So that would be a concern, I think. And then those that are matching are a different consideration. Those that need to be net new projects are a different consideration. Those that can fund existing projects in the pipeline that are already also human resourced are a different consideration. So I think there's multiple streams and conversations to have.
Great, wonderful, thank you. Councillor Turley, did you have a comment on this? Okay, great. I don't believe there is anything else. We've got a move for adjournment from Mayor Krogh, seconded by Councillor Hemmens. All in favor? Motion carried.
Mr. Chair.